Okay, the first part of this will be recorded, and then the question and answer will not be recorded. All right. Looking good, Ryan?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Over to you.
Thank you, Terrance. So, my name is Ryan, and I'm a relationship engineer. And what I do is I break down an understanding of exactly how relationships are built, how they're maintained, and ultimately what causes them to fail so we can avoid it. And I come at it from a very systematic engineering perspective as well as from a human perspective. So traditionally, I am an electrical and systems engineer by trade, by my academics, and I have done a lot of outreach in the community. I have done certain other things like interfaith work, some humanities work, and ultimately work in really trying to bring communities together. And that understanding of how communities are brought together and broken is quite similar to the way that we build our relationships one on one and how they are broken. And so, what I do is I basically take some interesting, complicated mumbo jumbo, jargon from engineering, simplify it, and give it to you in a way that can help you day by day, step by step, make the steps forward to reach the type of relationship goals that will make you happy and healthy. And so I come at it from, like I said, an engineering perspective and a human perspective. And one of the reasons why I really like partnering with Terrance is because we share a human perspective, but he comes with his own set of expertise that is different from mine. But I believe that we work really well together and supplement it so that you all can get kind of different views on the same topic or different explanations. And it just broadens the way of being able to understand what we're trying to get across and implement it. So, Terrance, tell them about what you do.
Okay, yep. I am a former criminal profiler and criminal investigator. So we're going to go through a lot of the profiling, a lot of the bad actors that are involved, and we try to, notice what are the tactics that manipulators and problematic people engage in. So once we get started with the presentation, it's going to be very clear that there's some names to remember. There's a lot of information we're going to try to go through as quick as possible, but also carefully. And Ryan, right before we start, can you let them know about our moderator team as well? Because they're always here working hard, and I'm terrible at names, so I don't want to butcher nobody's name.
I feel you, man. You've had a long day already. So, our moderator team consists of Andra, who's currently on camera. Thank you, Andra. We also have Jeannie, who's off camera today, but Andra and Jeannie, and our third one is Minna. The three of them really help us a lot behind the scenes. They help us moderate the meetup itself, as well as collect our questions and help us with any technical issues so that Terrance and I can really focus on delivering this presentation and focusing on answering your questions. So thank you to you, those three. And also, I'm sure they would appreciate it that as things go smoothly, that y'all could give them some thanks as well.
Absolutely. And let's go ahead and get started.
The first thing we wanted to talk about today is whether we are building relationships with our children, whether we are trying to salvage them, and even if we're trying to build a relationship, not just with our children, but with other people, it spans the whole, it is all encompassing. But when we're talking about children, it's very difficult to influence our kids if we don't know who they are. And what I mean by who they are is their personality. How do they view the world? What do they react to? What do they like? If we can start understanding who they are, we can understand how to reach them. The second step is understanding what or who influences them. So, a lot of the times when our kids are drawn to something, they like something, whether it's playing outside, whether it's sports, whether it's card games, whether it's hanging out with friends, who they're hanging out, the type of people they like to watch in movies, whoever their friends are talking to them about, that they're interested in looking up or talking about. These are their influences. If we don't understand what influences them, we have no idea what their state of mind is most of the time, and we don't know about the things they're not going to tell us. because as adults, we know how to communicate. We know how to articulate our feelings. We know how to bring difficult concepts from our mind and simplify it in our words. Kids don't know, and a lot of the time they don't know how to express themselves. And sometimes they're trying to express their thoughts and they say something completely different. So, by understanding what or who influences them, we can get a much better idea of their thought process and where they're going with it. And that gets us to number three, understanding who they respect. Whoever they respect is basically who they look up to, who they want to be, but also who they will listen to. So we can take a good look at the time that they spend in certain places with certain people or who they're listening to. And by writing that down and getting an understanding, we understand who other than us is influencing them, but also who they're going to try and emulate. And that's very important for number four is connect with them at their own level. One of the hardest things to do as a parent is to set aside our own personal emotion and take an emotional hit to understand that we need to connect with our kids, whatever age they're at, whatever emotional age they're at, whatever situation they're in, connect to them in a way that they can understand. Because no matter how good of intentions we have for them, or what we're doing, if they could just receive it, would be able to help them. Sometimes just a mismatch in what we're trying to give them, they're not capable of receiving. And just that tiny miscommunication is where we tend to talk past each other. So if we understand what they can comprehend, what they can understand, and the first three, then it's very easy to start building this relationship. And we can do that by spending time with them. We need to make sure that we spend time with them and we give them our honest, full attention when we do. Because kids are going to pay attention to the people who usually pay attention to them. And if we don't give them enough of our time, even though they might not say it, then they're thinking that they're not as important and they will turn their time somewhere else. So, number five is if once we understand who they are, what they like, what they're good at, and understanding what level they're at, we need to spend that time to nurture what they're good at, being the supporter in their life. And that's where we can start choosing what we want to encourage and what we want to discourage. And ultimately, as they're going through problems in life, we need to be the safe place for them to go to where they know if they've messed up. It's not that we're going to get ridiculously angry with them and punish them. It's they know that we're going to set them straight, but they would rather come to us than go to complete strangers. And that is a very good place to be at as a parent. So we can use that sensitivity and that ability of understanding where they're coming from to mentor them. And that mentorship is where we actually get to talk a lot more about how we want them to think about life or even the decisions we want them to make. And like I said, it's so hard to put our feelings aside, but at the end of the day, our kids have something to teach us. And if we're doing something wrong, it will show in our kids. And we need to just get rid of enough of our ego to understand that's feedback. So we just need to adjust slightly what we're doing if it's not working out. But one of the biggest things I want to say is we need to understand number four, which is connect with them at their own level. And as they get older, as they evolve, we can spend more time talking more about complicated subjects and really, really getting into the meat of our wisdom as adults and parents, because then they're finally at the age where they can understand.
Absolutely. So now that And one of the ways that I found to connect with them is we have to understand who influences them. Who do they watch? So this is the slide of rise of modern influence. So when I was starting my criminal profiling career, the influencer PewDiePie, which has a ridiculous name, but he has 29 billion views, mostly with Gen Z. And I noticed that this was a problem because Case after case, no matter if the case was in the suburbs or in the middle of the hood, I kept noticing children watching this man's content. And if this rings a bell, he was one of the grandfathers of the content using the video game Minecraft. So he would do streaming of himself playing Minecraft. And an entire generation of Gen Z children grew up watching this person. And I mean hours after hours after hours after hours. And just because I knew of this information, so many young people would talk to me with cases. The cases I'm working on, they would tell me about their parents. They would tell me about all the things that are going on in their life just because the knowledge of this influencer was a door that me and them could connect with. But this also creates a problem because, like this influencer, you have all these other influencers, and we didn't have time to include all the other pictures because we didn't want to make it too long. But like, there's an influencer named Ryan. A lot of young people know that this person made $29 million in 2020, and this is a child. And what is happening is children are watching the top one millionth of children become extremely successful, and they're watching this information without context. And as we go further into the slideshow, this distorts somebody's reality. So like myself, I grew up not with YouTube, but I grew up watching certain videos from like Best Buy and Blockbuster. And one of the franchises that impacted me that a lot of adults have never heard of is the Mischief Racing franchise. But a lot of young millennial men grew up watching this content. And the content was all about people driving really fast cars. It was like the movie Fast and the Furious, only it was real people. And a lot of individuals that come from like the car community like me grew up watching this content and wanting to emulate it. And that starts off okay when it's just entertainment. But the real money with influencing is when you start bringing the client into ideology and politics, because that allows you to sell them products on a whole nother level. And we'll continue with that. You're muted right now, Ryan.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
These influencers, like Terrance said, like the top one millionth is definitely not the reality of most kids, but it is disproportionate the amount of content they're consuming about such a niche and small group of people. So this is where the expectations versus reality is very important to understand. In this photo is Mr. Beast and several other influencers. If you didn't know, a lot of people in the tech space or YouTuber space or vlogging space, when they get a lot of money, they basically buy Lamborghini Huracan. It's so cliche to the point where everyone gets one and it becomes nothing special. And so now, you have this young kid who's watching somebody like Mr. Beast who's done over 10,000 hours of recording on YouTube and sunk millions of dollars into these large productions, all to get attention. And when you're consuming 20, 30 hours of this a week, this is not reality for most people. This isn't even reality for a lot of people who aspire or do well on YouTube. This is such a minority that they're being desensitized to the value of what they're living in right now, the value of the home that is being provided for them, the value of sitting together as a family and enjoying each other's company, but doing things together. And what this also brings in is when we're looking at these influencers, a lot of these influencers don't have, if we're going to be honest, a stable relationship life. They don't have stable relationships with others around them, stable relationships with their businesses, or stable relationships with potential significant others. And so the example they're setting is not the example that we're looking for. In fact, Terrence, when was the last time you saw a YouTuber like Mr. Beast putting out a video where he highlights his family or talks about family values and how important it is in his life to his success?
Essentially never. Not since he had like less than like 2 million subscribers. But the problem that happens with a lot of these influencers is somebody watching it from the outside might think that it's just one person, but you're watching an entire production company.
Hmm.
You're watching dozens, sometimes dozens and dozens of individuals that are putting together a product. People like Mr. Beast are sponsored by some of the same companies that sponsor stuff from like Disney and Comcast. But a lot of children they don't know this. And that's why even something as simple as there's over 90 million songs on YouTube that have never been listened to once.
Hmm.
But if you just look at the algorithm, it could fool people into thinking success is normal. But this is highly, highly unlikely. Like unbelievably unlikely that somebody will, first of all, even get a Lamborghini, let
Yep.
alone make enough money where they can destroy a Lamborghini for content. But one of the things that happened is over the last 10 years, the desire to be an influencer is becoming one of the most desired titles when you ask middle school and high schoolers, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Hmm.
And again, it's destroying the perception of like reality. Back to you.
Thanks, man. Yeah, we haven't seen people with this level of success have the stable type of family relationships that really give life a holistic meaning. And the disproportionate amount of watch hours on such an irregular type of success really warps kids' minds. Kids' minds are some of the most malleable things on this earth, and it can be one of the greatest advantages, and it can be one of the greatest disadvantages depending on what we let them consume. So we really need to spend enough time with our kids and understanding how they get access to this. Because if I'm going to be honest, just because you don't give them a phone doesn't mean they don't have access to it. You need to know who their friends are and where they're going and what they have access to outside of the house. And in suggesting or nurturing their relationship with certain families or certain friends is a way that we can mitigate the type of content they consume, the type of rhetoric they're going to use, all based on the friends that they hang around and who they spend the most time with. Because we want them to spend time with people who are most like us and who agree with most of our values. That way, when we're not around, they're getting kind of the same message from other people and solidifying it. But we have to make them understand or help them understand that a lot of what they're seeing and being pushed in media is not reality.
Absolutely. So when we talk about not reality, what we call this is the unicorn effect. And this is what happens when the internet through algorithms or social media makes something that's extremely rare in reality seem common. And this, so what often happens with social media algorithms, you can TikTok, it gives people access to niche communities that are very rare in reality, or problems that are really problems that happen mostly online. But if you're dealing with people in the real world, a lot of times, a lot of these issues fade. So online, it's very easy to look at all the differences in other people. But the more time you spend offline making friends, going to the park, going to the gym, you find that so many of us have so much more in common. And that's one of the kind of dangers of the internet is on one way it connects us, but then it often divides us as well. And especially because Uh, Bad news is 10 to 20 times more viral than good news.
Hmm.
So if somebody spends enough time on whether you're talking about Instagram, Facebook Reels, YouTube, it leads people to neurotic behavior where they see negativity over and over and over again. And that's why it's important to frame this information with young people that, hey, this is not necessarily the reality you pay attention to is not all of reality. Let's go outside and see what is actually happening in the world directly around you.
So when we understand the type of people that influence them and this perception, what they think is real and normal versus what's not normal, we can take that understanding with us and looking at the top 17 search topics. And these are in order of frequency. So a lot when we are teenagers, we are coming into a level of consciousness and experience where we're trying to measure ourselves against the world. And they search identity, who they are. They're trying to find out different types of fashion, different types of music, different types of groups, different types of sports, anything to fit into a community. But oftentimes, this is where people's mental health usually starts to decline. Mean moody teenagers, but it can get a lot worse. So they're struggling with that. And the next is life skills and adulting. Believe it or not, there are multiple generations where in our society, for whatever reason, there's been a breakdown of parents teaching the kids how to be adults. And what often they're left to is trying to figure it out on their own and expecting to have the answers. So they look up that as well. Sex and relationships is a big role. If we haven't nurtured them or shown them good examples of relationships as ourselves setting that example, they're also confused. Environment and eco anxiety. This is interesting because with the newer generations and how things have gone viral, the newer generations are moving more towards activism, but also worrying almost at a nihilistic level of are things so bad that it doesn't matter for us anymore? And it's a whole nother game that is now being played with social media and what is happening with kids. Number five is entertainment, aesthetics, and pop culture trends. They're trying to understand how they fit in and they don't want to miss out. So when their friend talks to them about a cool new trend, a cool new band, a cool new sport, the best place to hang out around town that they've never heard of that people have been visiting to for months, they don't want to be left behind. They're going to go start looking that up. And this is where they start to be consumers. Their identity is now starting to be based if they're following everyone else on consumerism. What clothes do I need to buy? How many times do I need to change my wardrobe? What type of music? What type of phone? How many times do I need to upgrade? Do I need the best things? When I get a car, how good does it need to be? But also, that goes back to their understanding of themselves, of tutorials on how-to content. Young girls are, if not the top consumers of beauty and makeup content. How do you contour? How do you put foundation? How do you do the different eyeliner styles? What's going to catch most people's attention, right? But also about puberty, beauty, and health, which means that they're not getting it from their parents. When we look at problems with others, we can also see how to focus on our own family and our own kids to make sure that they don't have these problems. Because if their friends are having these problems, they're more often or more likely to fall into the same trends if they don't have that support at home. And the easiest way, by the way, to make sure that our children's doesn't choose friends who are bad influences is to make sure that they don't have these problems about their self-identity or problems at home. Because those kids are more likely to actually not be friends with problematic kids and go somewhere else. And the last one is videos, like Terrance talked about, YouTube, even Instagram Reels, but also gaming. Gaming is a huge part of being able to spend time with friends when you can't see them in person. Anime, Terrence and I have talked about it quite a lot about the effect on anime, especially on young men, and just general social trends. So, if we have a good idea of what they might be going through, not in specifics, but these general categories, and we come from a place of understanding, it gives us a way to be a little bit empathetic or softer with our children so that they know they can talk to us about difficult things without being judged. But they won't respect us as much if we have no idea what is relevant to them. So, understanding what is relevant to our kids is one of the most important things we can do to connect to their level.
Absolutely. One thing I wanted to talk about is especially with number one, identity and mental health. And this is becoming very problematic, is children are now diagnosing themselves with mental health disorders.
Mm.
Um, they're going online and they're confused about where they are in the world. And because they're confused, they're looking for answers. And one of the problems is adolescence is just a confusing part of life. Being a teenager is a confusing part of life. And so many individuals don't realize that this is just a natural part. I'm 37 and I'm still making mistakes. Now I'm successful here, but I'm also making mistakes. And so many young people are not realizing that making mistakes is just part of being young. And they're trying to figure out why they're not perfect. Not that humanity in itself is just not perfect. And this is very telling. I don't know how much people are involved in tech, but August 7th is when ChatGPT 5 came out. And this was a huge deal because so many young teenagers have been using ChatGPT 4 as a friend.
Mm.
And if you look up content, some some people actually went into like a full-blown depression because the app has now changed. GPT-4 talked to people like it was your friend. It was like a friend. Chat GPT-5 is more just an analytical, this is the information. And this was devastating to millions of people. So on one end, even the advent of AI is a conversation that would definitely be helpful to have with young people because people are looking at some of these things like AI is the friend they don't have. But what happens when, let's say AI, the best ones were put behind a giant paywall? What do you do then? Or what do you do if that algorithm is no longer giving you the same information? And people are starting to get more and more used to getting automatic answers, not necessarily the best answers, but just automatic answers. And this is not human. It's just not. And the farther we get away from our own humanity, the more problems we have. Just like cities. There's so much research to show that cities breed psychopaths. And we're going to talk about this on Saturday when we give our whole presentation on sociopaths and psychopaths. But there's a huge correlation between the amount of time someone spends in cities and the loss of their empathy. But we'll talk about that later.
One last thing I wanted to add, Terrence,
Hmm.
is if we are not helping our children understand who they are and spending time with them, they'll spend that time somewhere else.
Absolutely.
And I saw a comment about how difficult it is to speak to teenagers. That's why we need to understand that process that I was talking about is understanding what they respect and what's relevant to them, because we can't expect them to speak our language. So we need to figure out how to reach our hand out as parents and speak their language. But at the end of the day, if we do not nurture and culture a certain level of respect by paying attention to them and nurturing them and teaching them, because believe it or not, kids, when they have somebody in front of them, an adult who believes in them and teaches them, they have respect. Kids know this from an early age. If we don't take that time, it is going to be significantly harder when they're a teenager, and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Only thing I would add is one of the ways to connect with teenagers is you find the domain in which they respect, and then you have somebody that's respected in that domain speak to them. So,
Mm.
like when I go to the streets, when I go to the hood, because every now and then I'm a substitute teacher just for fun, and I go to some really bad schools where the kids are acting up, they're swearing, blah, blah, blah. But I have a way to connect with them, especially the young wild men. And the way I connect is I'm a very good basketball player. So one of the rules is you can't talk trash if you can't beat the teacher one on one. So I'll find the best student and I'll humiliate him on the basketball court because I'm good. Like, so, but after I win, then they listen because now I've walked into their world and said, "Hey, look, man, I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm a pretty good basketball player. I might could have went D1, but I'm telling you, I'm not really that good. Like the world out there is the basketball players out there are way better than me. I'm not even 6 foot, and I'm only 207 pounds. Like there's 245-pound monsters out there. And then once we have that conversation, then they will often start telling me about their situation. So as we walk closer to them, they walk closer to us. And that's the process. So here's a way to start connecting with young people. And we have to change their awareness. So I like these three movies because of the values these three movies teach. Toy Story 4, one of the values in Toy Story 4 is that eventually you might outgrow your friends, and that's okay. That's okay. You can love someone, but that doesn't have mean you have to stay with them forever. And that's a very important lesson. The Lion King is a very important lesson about the circle you keep. Mufasa, for all his intelligence, he let a dangerous person way too close to his family. And his arrogance made it so he did not see Scar's true nature. This is a problem, especially as someone that is might one day run a household. We always have to stand at the doorway of our family and try to keep out threats, both physically and mentally. And Mufasa didn't do a particularly good job on that. Now he did better at the end. In death, he was a spirit and helped his son afterward. But something to watch. Next is Frozen. The thing about Frozen is this is what happens when a child has a gift that can be dangerous, but the parents never cultivate it. What did they do? They isolated her, put her in a room, never taught her how to use her gift of ice. And then what you end up doing in real life when you do something like that, you end up turning that person into a sociopath. And that's why even if the conversation would have been difficult. Even if the parents didn't have that skill set right there to help their daughter, it is necessary to go seek out people that know more. Maybe a therapist. I don't know, this magical kingdom. You can find somebody out there to help her. But that didn't happen. So what ended up happening is the daughters had to figure out life, and their parents didn't properly train them for their life. And even further is the cautionary tale in Frozen is be very careful about who you bring into your life who looks like a friend. Because the dangerous prince in this story wasn't much of a prince after all. Because just because somebody smiles doesn't mean they're your friend. So again, these three movies are really good for, children to young adults. These three movies right here teach really good lessons to teenagers. I'm gonna have a full write-up on all six of these movies on the Patreon and even questions to ask. So Godzilla Minus One is not your typical monster movie. It's actually one of the best movies I've seen about talking about the value of friends. The friends that the main character had in this movie were the perfect amount of honesty, um, forcefulness when he's not living up to his expectations, but also humility. They all talked about their failures and worked with each other. And this is a really good movie to talk about the types of traits you want to look for in your friends. The next one is RRR. This is very good for especially young boys out there who don't have a lot of friends and that struggle with that brotherhood mentality. I saw a lot of this in Chicago and Southwest Detroit with young men joining gangs because the gang really took on the the father figure that they never had. And this is a pretty it's kind of a funny movie, but it's also a lot of serious stuff that goes in there. But this is a real good example of the brotherhood mentality that so many young men wish they had. Mean Girls is always a classic because it's so important to understand how cliques work. And I don't think there was a better movie ever put out on how cliques work, the danger of joining certain cliques, the problems when you walk into an environment and you don't understand the established rules. One of the reasons this is so good is that people think this mentality stops when they leave high school, but oh no. This is all over the corporate world. This is all over the nonprofit world. This is all over the world, period. I was at the Woodward Dream Cruise with my wife over the weekend, and there's nothing but clicks out there. It's just that we've gotten a little bit taller, but in a certain way, we're still acting like children. So again, those are my 6 movies. Check out for the write-up on the Patreon.
Thank you, Terrance.
Yep, you're welcome.
Moving on from self-identity, friendship, how to build a or have a good example, a role model, or to be aware, right, of what good friends are not, such as the cliques and mean girls, or good examples of friendship like we find in RRR. We need to understand that at some point, how do our children conceptualize the idea of love? And we're in these two movies, we're talking about romantic love because this is one of the things that teens tend to search up one of the most is sex and relationships. But Titanic is an example of what love is not. That just because we are attracted to somebody, we find them physically attractive, or we find them fun, or we share an experience such as we're in a dangerous situation together, that is not love. That is not a good example of love. So that type of trust or affection can develop quickly, especially in a crisis, especially when we prioritize the other person. But sustaining that type of trust requires more than just shared experience of danger and being forced to work together. It requires time, consistency, dedication, effort, and ultimately commitment. And so we don't want our kids to watch something like Titanic and come out with the idea of that was a beautiful love story because it really wasn't. And what the characters are doing is living fully in the moment without an understanding of consequences. They're kind of just letting their desires take over, and our desires are not what love is. But what a good example of relationships, of a real relationship, is the movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind with Jim Carrey. And one of the reasons is because the type of relationship we see in movies like Titanic are very simple, very shallow, very desire driven, but they don't have a lot of real life complexity. Whereas in the second movie, Eternal Sunshine, for short, we see that it necessitates a level of both joy and pain, but the way that we deal with that pain and the way we reach our hand out to the other person can actually make our relationship stronger. So instead of running away from the difficulties, in order to nurture a long-term stable relationship, we don't choose somebody who is perfect, who we think has no flaws and is perfect for us. We choose somebody because the base essence of who they are is who we like and who we need, despite what they struggle with. And we help them through their struggles as they help us through ours. Really, that reciprocal servitude is what builds and grows the trust because we can be vulnerable with the person closest to us. And even after we've made mistakes, we're not running for the hills. And it is a much more realistic view on how to build relationships and what love really is. Next slide, Terrance. Thank you. So, when it comes to trying to put all of this information together on like a timeline, I call it the rule of sevens. I stole this from a very, very wise man. But basically, the rule of sevens is for most kids between the ages of right when they're born all the way up to about 7 years old. There isn't like a conscious. They don't really understand right from wrong all the time. And so what we want to do is teach by example, but not punish them. Because punishment or trying to make them feel bad as a consequence of what they've done, they're not necessarily able to wrap their mind around what's happening. And in the long term, it actually builds resentment and them saying no and rebelling against us. So we want to teach them in ways of instead of when they want to reach their hand over the counter and grab the cookies from the cookie jar and make a mess, instead of saying no, don't do that because they're going to repeat the word no to us later on in life. We want to say something different. So instead of being negative, we want to encourage them and say, in this house, we don't have cookies without asking. Or in this house, we ask mom and dad before we try and reach for stuff. Or something else of we do things this way. This is the way to do it. Which means that we're leading as an example of mentoring them of what we want them to do and not focusing on what we don't want them to do. Because wherever you put their attention is where they're going to focus. So we want to set the right example with positive correcting behavior rather than punishing negative emotional behavior. Now, between the ages of 7 and 14, if we've spent a good amount of time being that example of showing them what to do, not just with our words, but with our actions, this is where they're starting to understand and can have the intent, not the mistake, but the intent to do wrong or the intent to do good. So we need to focus on disciplining them, on reinforcing the boundaries that we set earlier when they were younger, but setting clear boundaries as life gets more interesting, more complicated for them as they get older. And we need to choose actions that help discipline them, meaning help give them the tools they need to think the right way and make the right decisions rather than straight punishment. So the best way is to use life's natural consequences of their actions rather than coming up with our own ways of disciplining kids. Meaning, if a kid or a teenager wanted to eat horribly as an athlete and not work out, they're going to see that they're slower. So the natural consequences is you're not going to feel good. You're not going to want to play the sport anymore. You're not going to do as well. You're not going to have as fun. Another natural consequence is, parents when they tell their kids, hey, like you want to go out with your friends, but have you finished your homework? Telling the kids that they can't go out with their friends because they haven't finished their homework is not a punishment. It's actually a tool to show them what they need to prioritize. Rather than when a child gets a bad grade, telling them you are grounded, you can't do anything else is an emotional punishment that they're not going to understand how it's relevant to how they've made a mistake. Instead, sitting down with them and saying that, well, this is a priority, but I'm going to meet you where you're at and I'm going to help you succeed is how we really give them discipline. But at the end of the day, there have to be boundaries. And so, again, it's about discipline, not punishment. From the ages of 14 to 21, this is where teenagers are coming to understand where they fit into the world and how they view things. and we've got to let them make some of their own mistakes. So if we befriend them at this age where they're going through one of the hardest times of their life, where they're trying to build their self-identity and understand how they fit into society and choosing their friends and choosing the groups, we want to take a step back rather than an authority figure and now become more mentoring or nurturing, that safe space where they can come talk to us when they have a problem. They can come talk to us when they've done something wrong because they know that we're there to help not just set them straight, but get them out of whatever trouble they're in. And if we took that time in their first 7 years to make sure that we're not saying no and just punishing them, and the next 7 years of instilling the proper boundaries so that they have their life together, then when we make sure we're not judgmental and we're helpful, that is where they come to us to get help. That is where they come to us with their problems rather than anybody else on YouTube and online. And we want to start treating them like an adult. And what I mean by treating them as an adult is don't treat them like they can't understand what you're saying. Try to tell them. And if they say they don't understand, make it dumber. But don't speak to them like they don't know anything, because that's one of the quickest ways we can lose respect from our children. And teenagers will be moody. It's a very hormonal time. So the easiest thing we can do is speak to them as if they're smart, treat them as if they're smart. And if they didn't understand, most teens are going to tell you, hey, that makes no sense to me. And you're like, okay, let me try a different way. After they reach 21, they're usually in college, at the end of their college, or they might have spent some time away from home. We just want to step back and go, you're an adult. We taught you almost everything we could that you needed to at the time. And now we trust you to make your own decisions. But hey, I'm always here. I'm always checking in. I'm always calling or texting or doing something to keep that relationship. But the same way we tried to mentor or befriend them when they were teenagers to young adults, we want to do that throughout their adult life because we're the only ones that are closest to them that they can come to when they go, hey, I got a letter in the mail from the IRS because apparently I didn't pay taxes. I don't know how to do that. Like, how much trouble am I in? You know what I'm saying? If we didn't tell them when they were 18 or they went off to college and they got a side job and they just forgot, like that's the time that we really pay attention to them. So when Terrance and I are talking about YouTube videos and books and media and games and their friends and all that, we can fit it into these nice rule of sevens in order to put it in perspective. Next slide, Terrance. Okay. When it comes to discipline, I urge parents when it comes to the iron fist of authority of you're going to listen to me because I'm the adult and I know better and I don't have time to explain it to you and I won't explain it to you and you're just going to get it when you're older. Sometimes this is true, but more often than not, this is relevant in emergency situations. To give you an example, both of my parents grew up in a civil war. They were immigrants here. And if my dad or my mom wanted to go outside and not listen to their parents, they could end up dead or as a hostage. So sometimes there is no time to explain in the moment. It is, you're going to listen to me and I'm going to be forceful about it for your own safety. But in everyday life, this leading out of fear and out of control, and I am the authority, and what I say goes no matter what, and I'm not going to explain it to you, actually trains kids to, if they listen to us, we're training them to listen to whoever the supposed authority is without them thinking for themselves. Or they can end up constantly rebelling against us and the authority. So they can either become people who follow everyone else and they can't make their own way in life, and whatever we try and teach them later on, it's not going to matter, or they're going to become Problems. Problems to us, problems to their friends, problems to work, problems with the law. The second one, they become products of everyone else's logic. So whatever they consume online, they think they're an authority, even if they don't have a reason to believe it, and they follow it. It also leads to sneaky children. I'm not saying that strict parenting leads to sneaky children. I'm saying that when you are strict, but you don't know how to connect to your child and remove yourself by saying, I'm the authority and you don't understand, too bad, you can't understand, is where we start losing them. And when they get to the teenage years and they start becoming clever, they find ways to get around that. Now actually, in the chat, did anyone see what I'm missing on this slide or something really weird? I'm just curious because we hid something in here. You can tell me in chat if you find it. Yeah, Lana. Yeah, a finger. So, just like the hand that's missing an important appendage, the pinky, which I'm thankful I have, especially as somebody who used to be a musician. So does the Iron Fist of Authority miss something, which is when you try and rule and discipline out of fear and ultimate control, you are missing the type of connection where the child respects you and wants to come to you. Instead, we are forcing it upon them and they are waiting for the moment that we're not there. And the only way that trying to raise them out of fear or control works is if we're constantly there. And even then it will work against us. So when we get angry and we don't know what to do, let's take just a little bit more time to figure out how we want to lead our kids. Because if it's through anger and fear or through ultimate control and not explaining, those have ripple effects. And those ripple effects we're going to get to in the next slide. Terrance, take us away.
Yeah, so ripple effects is something I noticed a lot when I looked at people's history. And so much so that the kids mimic their parents. So when I looked at people's criminological history, I would see stuff like child starts getting involved in crime at 12. Grandparent got involved in crime at 12. And it was, if you look at people's history, they mimic. It's scary how these generational problems just layer and layer upon each other unless somebody breaks that cycle. And it's so important is children don't listen to what they say, they copy what they do. So again, we can talk all day about values and principles and all these things, but the children see our actions. And that's where we end up with this incongruency. So the way we get better children is to become the better version, the best version of ourselves. So when I worked with families, something that worked so well is when the children knew more about what their parents were going through. Something as honest as, right now the economy's tough. Right now I'm dealing with a boss that won't listen. Right now I'm dealing with this, and I'm trying my best not to take it out on you. But like how you talking about getting bullied at school, I'm getting bullied at work. And these honest conversations start bridging communication between parent and child. But one of the big things is, and I notice this especially with males, is having overly emotional negative reactions to things that are simple, easy, and not that big of a deal make children lose respect towards their parents. So if I know that if I tell my dad something, he's going to blow up, then I'm not going to tell him.
Mhm.
And what that means is no, now the parent is no longer the guardian force because the child will take those questions to their friends, to the internet, to all these other places. And this is why there's so many times children are either uninformed or they're misinformed.
Mhm.
And that respect loss is the relationship loss. And what often happens is now the child goes out into the world misguided, confused. You got all these kids out here. I remember 2, 3 years ago, and I call them kids, but a lot of them when they're in their 20s and they're spending their whole life savings on cryptocurrency with no understanding of the world of cryptocurrency. You are not going to find someone on a legitimate forum where people are actually trading real assets saying, hey, put all of your money into cryptocurrency. But the influencers told them to do it. Celebrities told them to do it. Their friends told them to do it. And now the damage is incomprehensible. There's no telling how many people lost tons of money and tons of trust that
Mhm.
way. And not just with the cryptocurrency, with the NFTs. People stop talking about the NFTs real quick too. But again, that is why community is so important. And when we have children, we have young people, we have to tell them the process of how capitalism works.
Mhm.
And that process is the person that has money but no wisdom. If that person comes across somebody with real wisdom, then that person's going to leave with your money. So you have to understand these things, is be very careful investing in people or things that you don't understand. And don't treat strangers as friends. Have some type of criteria that you can talk about what is a real friend, what is a real somebody I should actually talk to. Because if not, again, it creates a void and the children will create surrogate parents, which is the outside world taking the role. That's that whole Andrew Tate and all this other stuff where people are listening to strangers tell them what it means to be an adult. So now, oh,
Terrence,
go ahead,
can you
Ryan.
go
Go ahead.
back one slide?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry about that.
No problem. I wanted to give an example of what we mean by kids mimic their parents and why it can come back as a ripple effect. And I'll give you an example from my childhood. I took the car out when I shouldn't have, and it was too dangerous. And although I did, when I wrecked the car in the snow, I was a good driver and I didn't completely wreck it. But when I brought it home, my mom found out. And uh, she did not blow up at me. She did not go crazy. She simply asked, "What happened? Tell me. How did it happen? Why did you think it was a good idea? Okay, let's sit down. Please explain to me your plan to make this right." And the reason that was so important is at the end of the day, if my parents are setting the example of when there's a problem, being able to assess how important it is, how problematic or real bad of a problem it really is, and okay, what are our next steps forward? I'm actually going to respond that way if I'm mad at my mom. I'm going to respond that way with other people. If when our children, when a child does something bad and we blow up or we blow up at anything that happens, we're telling them it doesn't matter the severity of your mistakes. I'm going to blow it up out of proportion. And what they're going to see from us is let your emotions take over. And as long as you're in authority, you can do what you want with it. So when they feel superior to somebody else, or when they feel they can get away with it instead of using their brain, even if we're yelling at them, even if we're telling them exactly what they did wrong and all the things they need to do differently, that's not what they're receiving. What they're receiving is our full-blown emotion being blown up out of proportion. And that's what they're going to turn around and do to their friends, their own children, the people who are under them at work, or even us. That is what we mean by kids don't listen to what their parents tell them, they listen to what their parents do. So we need to understand that certain problems are bigger problems than others and require more severe action. And some, even if we're worried about it, we need to respond to them the way we want them to respond to us if we were in the opposite scenario. That's the example we need to give, and that's where we need to step on our ego and our emotions sometimes. Next slide, Terrence.
Absolutely. So the path forward, again, everything starts at home. Many parents underestimate how much influence they really have over their kids. And a lot of times children don't go to their parents about what's going on in their life for shame. They don't they don't want to look bad in front of their parents. And that's something that came up constantly, especially when I was working crimes against children, is the children would blame themselves for anything that happened to them, not looking at the fact that they were vulnerable. And again, that's why it's so important to have even something I call State of the Union. Every week or 2 weeks, it helps a lot to just talk to them, figure out what's going on in their life, but also figure out, let them know what's going on in your life. One of the things that I thought was so interesting is a lot of kids are smart. They're very smart. And that's actually something that really concerned me after a number of interviews is if I was talking to a child that was older than 9, that person often knew and saw exactly what was wrong with the parents. To the
Mhm.
point where many times they knew who was the problematic parent or who was the problematic family member. They just had the entire thing mapped out. So it made me think like, geez, when I have kids, like they're really like a recording device. They're just recording the entire environment,
Mhm.
and they're going to record everything around it. They're mirrors to the truth a lot of times. Oh, see it in the comments. Absolutely. So it starts with the children. Next, it starts with the community. What is the community they're watching? And is it a helpful community? Who's teaching? Who's the leader of this community and where are they leading that person to? There's a really good book about this called Lost at School, and it talks about how so many school systems are set up to take away the thinking capacity of children, that kids that have above average intelligence, kids that are extremely creative are often beat down in a lot of school systems and they're meant to conform. And it
Mhm.
takes away the creativity of the modern child and turns them into a more pliable person that the school system is used to. And this is a real good book that talks about it. The other one is personal development and honest heroes. Is talk to your children about what a hero should be. Who should be somebody you look up to? I know that was a big thing for me is realizing like almost every person I looked up to as a child, especially celebrities, these weren't cool people when I got older and started actually looking into them because you're only watching one aspect of them. You're not watching the full gambit of who they are. And but with that, thank everybody for attending. We're going to put a larger article together for the Patreon probably tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then Saturday morning. All right. And just really quickly with the news again, the book is coming out in September. The next event is going to be Smart Dating Part 4. So, since we're doing Part 4, we're going to start going right into how to dissect and the different types of sociopaths. Because all sociopaths and psychopaths are not the same. There's worse ones. And to give an example, we're going to use the movie that came out, Weapons. Also, we have the Smart Love After Heartbreak. Again, that got pushed back to September. We're gonna start planning some other stuff, but we're just really trying to get the book out. Again, the Patreon, we're up to 349 members, and the YouTube is 470 members, so we're just moving right along. We appreciate all the support. And again, the Patreon has over 30 articles posted already, so we are keeping it going. I am about to turn off the